All right, so you guys have sent us like a ton of stuff about um, history and philosophy of science with like this big focus on paradigm shifts.
Right.
We're talking excerpts from Michael Shermer's audiobook,
Yeah.
The Borderlands of Science, chapters 6 and 7. And let me tell you, things get pretty wild in the Borderlands.
What's so cool about these chapters is that they like tackle this really big question.
Yeah.
What makes a scientific revolution? It's not just about, new discoveries, right? It's about how those discoveries clash with our existing beliefs.
Right.
And then how they reshape our understanding of the world.
Totally. It's like we think of science as this steady march of progress, right? But then, bam, a paradigm shift comes along and totally throws everything we thought we knew into question.
Yeah.
Like imagine Copernicus just telling everyone, nope, the Earth actually revolves around the sun. That's what we're going to unpack today.
And your sources go like way beyond just the aha moments of discovery, right?
Yeah.
We're really going to dig into like the social and psychological forces at play, like how these new ideas battle for acceptance, the personalities of the scientists, and why some thinkers are more likely to embrace these radical shifts than others.
And we're going to like get really up close and personal with two super fascinating case studies. The Copernican revolution, obviously, which like totally upended how humanity saw its place in the universe.
Yeah.
And then the life of Alfred Russel Wallace, a scientist who really straddled the line between like accepted science and the downright bizarre.
I like that, the downright bizarre.
Right.
Yeah.
But before we get into these specific revolutions, I think it's important to understand what exactly we mean by paradigm shift.
Right, and Shermer, he borrows from the philosopher Karl Popper, who distinguishes between like a scientific revolution where one theory just replaces another and an ideological revolution, which is really the game changer.
Okay, so I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
What makes an ideological revolution so different?
Well,
is it like one theory is just, a small tweak?
Yeah.
And the other one just blows the whole system wide open?
Exactly. Yeah, an ideological revolution, it doesn't just like update our scientific knowledge, right? It challenges those deeply held beliefs and values. It impacts, everything from religion and culture to like our understanding of ourselves and our place in the universe.
So it's less about the specific like scientific details and more about the ripple effects it has on like everything.
Yeah, it's like proving germs exist isn't just a cool fact.
Right.
It changes how we think about hygiene and medicine.
Yeah.
And even like our fear of getting sick.
Totally. And a
perfect example of this ripple effect is the debate around punctuated equilibrium, or PE, which Shermer dives into.
Okay.
Now, in the grand scheme of things, PE is just a theory in evolutionary biology about the pace of change in the fossil record.
So not exactly something that's going to like start a religious war.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
But it's the perfect example of how a seemingly small shift in scientific thinking can create huge waves in a particular field.
Okay.
PE suggests that evolution isn't always this like slow, gradual process.
Right.
Instead, you have these long periods of stability.
Right.
And then they can be punctuated by these sudden bursts of change.
Okay.
And this really challenged the prevailing view at the time, which was all about, slow and steady wins the evolutionary race.
Right. So what happened when this punctuated idea hit the scene? Did everyone just kind of like accept it, or was there some drama?
There was definitely drama.
Okay.
Paleontologist Donald Prothero, who was like right there in the thick of it, described it as an academic earthquake.
Wow.
Suddenly, there were new journals dedicated to debating PE conferences, buzzing with arguments about its significance, and established scientists like scrambling to adapt or, digging in their heels.
So it sounds intense.
Yeah.
But if it was just about fossils, Why all the fuss?
That's where the human element comes in, right? It
No,
wasn't just about the fossils. It was about reputations, about who got credit for the idea, and about the power dynamics within the scientific community.
Oh, I love a good science rivalry.
Yeah.
So who were like the major players in this paleontological showdown?
Well, you can't talk about PE without mentioning Stephen Jay Gould.
Right.
Right. He was brilliant, and he really popularized the theory. But then you have Ernst Mayr,
Okay.
another titan of evolutionary biology,
Right.
who claimed that he actually laid the groundwork for PE like way back in 1954.
Wait, so the seeds of the idea were already there,
Yeah.
but it took like almost 2 decades for it to really take root. That's interesting.
It is, and it gets you thinking, how often does science work this way, right?
Right.
Not with a sudden eureka moment,
Yeah.
but with an idea slowly gaining momentum as different pieces of the puzzle kind of fall into place.
Yeah, and of course you can't forget the critics.
Right.
Right. Shermer mentions like big names like Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins, who weren't exactly fans of PE.
Yeah.
They called it everything from overblown
Right.
to just plain bad science.
It's important to remember, though, that neither Dennett nor Dawkins are paleontologists. They come from, different branches of biology and philosophy. So it raises the question, when is it okay for scientists outside a specific field to weigh in on a debate?
Right, right.
Can they offer, like, valuable insights, or are they just, like, oversimplifying the issue?
It's like I wouldn't want, like, a physicist telling me how to interpret like a poem.
Right.
Even if they're super smart, maybe they could offer a fresh perspective on like the structure of language or something.
Right, yeah.
It's a tricky balance.
Absolutely. And this brings us to Michael Ruse, who decided to take like a quantitative approach to figuring out like how much of an impact PE actually had.
Right.
He used citation analysis, which basically tracks how often a scientist's work is referenced by others.
So it's like a popularity contest.
Kind of.
For scientific ideas,
Yeah.
the more citations, the more influential the theory.
In a way, yeah. But as Sherma points out, Ruse's approach wasn't without its flaws.
Okay.
He compared citations of Gould's work on PE to the citations of Edward O. Wilson's much broader books on topics like sociobiology and biogeography.
Hold on. Isn't that a little bit like comparing apples and oranges?
Yeah.
I mean, PE is like a very specific theory.
Yeah.
Whereas Wilson's work covers like these vast areas of science.
Right.
That doesn't seem like a fair comparison.
Exactly. And it highlights the limitations of using purely quantitative methods, right, to assess the impact of scientific ideas.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that numbers can only tell us so much.
So if citation analysis isn't like the perfect tool, how do we determine if a theory is truly revolutionary?
Oh, that's a question that philosophers of science have been grappling with for centuries.
Okay.
But one thing seems clear. The acceptance of new ideas, especially those that challenge the status quo, is rarely a simple, straightforward process.
Okay, I'm starting to see why you called punctuated equilibrium like the perfect example.
Yeah.
It's not just about the science itself, right? It's about all this messy human stuff that surrounds it.
Yeah.
The debates, the rivalries, the struggle to convince others. That's what makes it a real paradigm shift.
Precisely. And it highlights the importance of understanding the social and psychological forces, right? Yeah. That shape scientific progress. It's not just about logic and evidence. It's about personalities, power dynamics, and the very human tendency to resist change. Right. Especially when it challenges those deeply held beliefs.
And speaking of resisting change, let's talk about a revolution that really shook things up. Okay. The Copernican revolution.
Yeah.
I mean, this wasn't just about like tweaking a theory.
Right.
This was about completely overturning humanity's understanding of its place in the universe.
Yeah, big time.
Right.
Huge. You're absolutely right. Like, imagine living in a world where, everyone just believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, fixed and unmoving. That's the medieval worldview that Shermer describes, this picture of, like, order and hierarchy with Earth at the center. Right. And the heavens revolving around us.
And it wasn't just, like, an abstract idea, right? This Earth-centered view is like woven into like everything, like religion, politics, even medicines. Like today we might say, oh, Mercury's in retrograde, better stay home or something.
Right, exactly.
But back then, like the positions of the planets were thought to directly influence your health.
Precisely. It wasn't just astronomy, right? It was like a complete system of knowledge, a way of making sense of the world and humanity's place within it.
Right.
And the system, it relied on correspondences, right? Like linking the macrocosm, the universe, to the microcosm, humans.
Right.
So the king's authority mirrored the sun's dominance. The Earth's central position reinforced the idea of like human significance. Everything was interconnected.
Okay, so this wasn't just about science.
No.
It was about like challenging an entire way of life.
Yeah.
So no wonder people like freaked out when Copernicus came along and was like, hey, what if the Earth actually goes around the sun?
Exactly. And the reactions were intense.
Yeah.
Martin Luther, leader of the Protestant Reformation, called Copernicus a fool for suggesting such a thing.
I can see, like, why people would be so resistant, even if, like, the evidence pointed toward a heliocentric model.
And it wasn't just religious figures who were like worried, right? The idea of like a moving Earth threatened like the entire social order.
Right.
Think about it. If this like fundamental truth could be overturned, like what else might be questioned?
Yeah.
The authority of the church, the power of the king, the very structure of society.
Right.
It all seemed a lot less stable.
Schirmer even quotes Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida, where a character warns that, like, questioning the Earth's central position would lead to chaos.
Exactly.
It shows just how deeply ingrained this geocentric view was.
It's a perfect example of ideological immunity.
Right.
Right. That concept we discussed earlier. The more knowledge and beliefs you have, like, invested in a particular worldview, the harder it becomes to, like, accept anything that contradicts it.
Right.
Even if the evidence is, like, right there in front of you.
So even though Copernicus was, like, his ideas were met with resistance.
Yeah.
Because they were just, like...
Too radical.
Too radical for most people to handle.
Yeah.
But wasn't Copernicus himself a bit hesitant to, like, rock the boat?
That's what's interesting, right? Even though Copernicus sparked this revolution, he was, like, a rather cautious revolutionary. He delayed publishing his work for years. And he, like, really emphasized the mathematical aspects of his theory, perhaps hoping to, like, avoid too much controversy.
Yeah. Maybe he knew that, like, challenging a deeply ingrained worldview would take more than just scientific evidence, right? It would require, like, a shift in the entire, like, cultural landscape.
Yeah, that's a brilliant insight.
Thanks.
And it brings us to Frank Selloway's research on birth order and scientific innovation.
Okay.
He found that later-born children are statistically more likely to support radical ideas.
Wait, so my younger siblings are more likely to become, like, scientific revolutionaries?
Not necessarily. But Selloway's research, it does suggest, like, a fascinating link between... birth order and openness to new ideas.
Okay.
He theorizes that later born, they experience less parental authority.
Right.
And, like, they have to carve out their own niche within the family. And this leads them to, like, develop a greater tolerance for uncertainty.
Okay.
And they're more likely to, like, question established norms.
They're like the rebels of the family. Always. Like...
Kinda, yeah.
Pushing boundaries and challenging the status quo.
In a way, yeah.
Okay.
And while Copernicus was a later born himself, he was, as we mentioned, quite cautious. But other key figures in the Copernican revolution, like Kepler and Galileo, they were firstborns who had, like, unconventional upbringings, which might have, contributed to their willingness to
embrace these radical ideas.
Embrace and champion these radical ideas.
So it's not just about birth order, but also about, like, the unique experiences that shape our personalities and our willingness to, like, embrace change.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder, what kind of person does it take to truly challenge the status quo and usher in, like, a new era of scientific thinking?
That's an excellent question. And it brings us to Alfred Russel Wallace, a man who seemingly embodied this spirit of, like, intellectual independence and a willingness to venture into uncharted territories of knowledge.
Now, most people know Darwin as, like, the father of evolution. But Wallace, he, like, independently arrived at the theory of natural selection.
He did.
Right. And on top of that, he was known for his fascination with ideas that were, well, outside the mainstream of scientific thought.
Yeah, outside the mainstream.
Right.
That's what makes Wallace such a fascinating figure.
Yeah.
He was a brilliant naturalist, meticulous in his observations, groundbreaking in his scientific work.
Right.
But he also embraced ideas like spiritualism, a belief system that claimed to offer evidence for life after death.
So the guy who co-discovered natural selection, one of the most, like, important scientific theories of all time, also believed in, like, ghosts.
He did. It goes against, like, our typical image of a scientist, right?
Sure.
As someone who only deals with, like, cold, hard facts.
Right.
And rejects anything that can't be, like, empirically proven.
Right.
But Wallace, he wasn't afraid to explore ideas that fell outside the boundaries of what was considered acceptable science at the time.
It's like he had this, like, insatiable curiosity.
Yeah.
This drive to understand the world, whether through the lens of, like, established science or by venturing into, like, more unorthodox realms of knowledge.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, right?
Yeah.
Did this willingness to explore the fringes actually contribute to, like, his scientific breakthroughs?
It's a great question.
And it's something that Shermer touches upon with his concept of Borderlands science.
Okay.
These ideas that, like, sit at the edge of accepted knowledge, the fringes where the truly novel, the potentially revolutionary often resides.
So Wallace was like a scientific explorer.
Yeah, I like that.
Right. Pushing the boundaries of what was known.
Yeah.
And venturing into uncharted territory.
Precisely. But let's be honest, some of his ideas, like phrenology, the belief that the shape of your skull, like, reveals your personality traits, seem pretty out there, even for the 19th century.
Right.
But remember, we're looking at this through a modern lens, right?
Right.
In Wallace's time, phrenology was considered a legitimate science by some.
Wow. So even, like, royalty was into this stuff.
It really shows how ideas that we might consider, like, fringe or even ridiculous today were once taken quite seriously.
So interesting.
And that's what makes studying the history of science so fascinating.
Yeah.
It challenges our assumptions about, like, what constitutes real science and how knowledge evolves over time.
Okay, so Wallace was open to, like, exploring unorthodox ideas.
Yeah.
But he wasn't just blindly accepting everything.
Yeah.
He was also, like, fiercely critical of pseudoscience.
He was.
Especially the flat earth theory, which was gaining popularity at the time.
Right, exactly.
So we're not talking about, like, a lack of critical thinking.
No, not at all.
Right. It's more about this, like, fascinating tension between skepticism and open-mindedness.
Yeah.
Right. Wallace was willing to entertain, like, a wide range of ideas, but he also, like, insisted on subjecting them to rigorous scrutiny.
Exactly. And this brings us back to those two bizarre incidents in Wallace's life.
Okay.
That Shermer mentions.
Right. We were going to dig into those.
Yeah.
What were they again?
Well, one incident involves Wallace's fascination with spiritualism.
Right.
In 1865, he attended a seance where the medium seemed to produce, like, genuine phenomena.
Okay.
Now, remember, this is a time when spiritualism was all the rage.
Right.
Even among some intellectuals.
So not just, like, spooky table wrapping in a dimly lit room, but a movement that claimed to offer, like, evidence for life after death, communication with spirits.
Exactly.
All that thing.
And Wallace, ever the empiricist, conducted his own investigation.
Wow.
Even published a book.
Really?
Defending spiritualism as a legitimate area of scientific inquiry.
Okay, but that's not really bizarre, right?
Right.
I mean, lots of people were into spiritualism back then.
Yeah, true.
It's more like unexpected coming from a scientist of Wallace's caliber.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Right.
Yeah. But here's where it gets a bit more intriguing.
Okay.
Wallace also became deeply interested in phrenology, the study of the shape of the skull.
Hold on, phrenology.
Yes.
It's not the thing where they, like, poke and prod your head and tell you if you're good at math or prone to violence.
Precisely.
That's stuff that's been like pretty much debunked.
Yeah, pretty much. But
Right.
in the 19th century, it was considered a cutting-edge science by some.
Right.
Wallace even had his own head examined by a famous phrenologist.
Oh, wow.
Who declared him to have a highly developed organ of veneration.
So according to phrenology, Wallace was wired for, like, deep respect and reverence.
Yeah, interesting, considering his spiritual leanings, right?
Right, yeah.
And this incident, it reveals, like, a key aspect of Wallace's approach to knowledge.
Okay.
His willingness to entertain ideas that fell outside the mainstream.
Right.
Even those considered, like, fringe or controversial.
It's almost like he had a higher tolerance for ambiguity than many of his contemporaries.
I think so.
He wasn't content with simply accepting the boundaries of acceptable science.
Yeah.
He wanted to like explore the edges.
Yeah.
Test the limits of what was known and unknown.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And while some might see this as like a weakness or like a lack of scientific rigor, others might argue that it's this very quality, this openness to the unorthodox that allowed Wallace to make like groundbreaking discoveries.
Right. After all, he did arrive at natural selection independently of Darwin.
He did.
Maybe those who are willing to venture into the borderlands, as Schirmer puts it, are more likely to stumble upon like those truly revolutionary insights.
It's a thought-provoking idea.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that the history of science isn't just like a neat linear progression.
Right.
It's full of detours, dead ends, and unexpected leaps forward, often driven by individuals who dared to challenge the status quo.
So how do we, like, reconcile Wallace's acceptance of spiritualism and phrenology, these ideas that seem so unscientific to us now, with his brilliant scientific work on natural selection and biogeography?
Well, Schirmer, he offers some intriguing explanations. One is this concept of ideological immunity that we discussed earlier. It suggests that the more knowledge someone has, the more likely they are to like defend existing beliefs, even when confronted with contradictory evidence.
So in a way, Wallace's vast knowledge of the natural world might have actually made him more susceptible to certain fringe ideas.
It's possible.
He was so confident in his understanding of nature, so certain of his like scientific methods, that he might have like overextended those methods into areas where they weren't as applicable.
It's a fascinating paradox.
Yeah.
Expertise, while crucial for, scientific advancement, can also create like blind spots, making us less receptive to ideas that fall outside our established framework of understanding.
But there's another explanation that Schirmer explores, one that delves into like Wallace's personality.
Right.
Remember that 5-factor personality analysis?
Yeah.
Well, we don't have Wallace's scores. Schirmer suggests he might have like shared some traits with Gould. High in openness to experience, perhaps, but also with like a strong moral compass.
That's an interesting point. Wallace was deeply concerned with social justice, and he believed that spiritualism, with its emphasis on, a spirit world that transcended material concerns, offered a path to a more equitable society. His scientific work, too, was often driven by a desire to understand the interconnectedness of life and the importance of ecological balance.
So it wasn't just like a quest for knowledge's sake. Right. Wallace's like scientific and spiritual pursuits were intertwined with his deeply held ethical beliefs.
Precisely. And this reminds us that scientists, like all humans, are driven by, a complex web of motivations, curiosity, ambition, a desire to make sense of the world, and often a deep-seated belief in the power of knowledge to improve the human condition.
It's a reminder that science isn't just like a sterile collection of facts and figures.
It's just a human endeavor, shaped by individual passions, personalities, and yes, sometimes even a bit of eccentricity.
And it's this very human element, the drive to question, to explore, to push the boundaries of what we know that has like propelled scientific progress throughout history.
Absolutely. And sometimes those who make the most significant leaps forward are the ones who aren't afraid to venture into those uncharted territories, the borderlands of science, where the truly unexpected awaits.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about these paradigm shifts, these moments where our understanding of the world kind of takes like a sharp turn. And it's become clear that it's not just about, the facts, right? It's about the personalities, the power struggles, and the very human tendency to, like, cling to what we think we know, even when it's wrong.
Yeah, it's like we have this image of scientists as these, like, purely rational beings. But the reality is so much more complex and honestly much more interesting.
Totally. And we've seen how, like, even a niche theory, like punctuated equilibrium, can cause this major, like, shakeup in a field.
Right.
And then there's the Copernican revolution, which completely redefined, like, humanity's place in the cosmos. And of course, Alfred Russel Wallace, who embraced both groundbreaking science and ideas that some might consider, well, a bit out there.
Right. But here's the thing about Wallace. He wasn't just blindly accepting these unconventional ideas. Right? He applied the same rigor, the same insistence on evidence to his investigation of spiritualism, like as he did to his studies of the natural world. He even took on the flat earthers who were promoting this, like, demonstrably false idea.
So it wasn't a lack of critical thinking on his part, right? It was more like he just had this incredibly high tolerance for ambiguity, this willingness to explore ideas that others might just dismiss out of hand.
Totally.
And that brings us back to Shermer's concept of Borderlands science. These ideas that sit at the edge of accepted knowledge.
The fringes?
Yeah, the fringes, where the truly novel, the potentially revolutionary,
often resides.
It's like the Wild West of scientific thought.
I like that.
A bit dangerous, a bit unpredictable, but with the potential for incredible discoveries.
Absolutely.
But navigating this terrain, it's tricky.
It is.
For every genuine breakthrough that emerges from the borderlands, there are countless dead ends, false trails, and just outright pseudoscience.
Yeah, so how do we separate the wheat from the chaff?
Right. How do we know which unconventional ideas are, like, worth exploring? And which are best left alone?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's no, like, easy answer, right?
It requires this delicate balance, of critical thinking, intellectual humility, and a willingness to be wrong. We need to be skeptical of extraordinary claims, demand evidence, but also remain open to the possibility that our current understanding might be incomplete.
Yeah, it's almost like a dance between doubt and wonder,
I like that.
Between the rigor of scientific inquiry and the boundless curiosity that drives us to explore the unknown.
And it's a dance that each of us must learn to perform. As we navigate this ever-changing landscape of knowledge.
Totally.
We have to decide which ideas to embrace, which to challenge, and which to just leave behind.
As we journey toward a deeper understanding of the world and our place within it.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's not about being right or wrong all the time. It's about staying curious, staying engaged, and staying open.
To the possibility that what we think we know today might be overturned by, a paradigm shift tomorrow.
This deep dive has really highlighted that the path to, like, scientific truth is rarely straight or simple.
It's messy, it's human, and it's often those who dare to venture into the borderlands, those who challenge conventional thinking, who lead us to those, like, truly transformative moments of understanding.
So if there's one thing you take away from this deep dive, let it be this. Never stop questioning, never stop exploring, and never be afraid to venture into those uncharted territories of knowledge.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.